Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I kind of want to have like a continuation of a topic I kind of brought up like a few weeks ago. Basically, the topic was kind of final season, series finales, and just endings like that. But I kind of want to I want to continue more on the topic of endings. So if you kind of think of this as a continuation, but it's just more specific, I guess it's a question of like, what kind of endings do you like? Do you like happy endings, incomplete endings, complete endings? Now what I mean by like incomplete is like you don't get elaborated on everything, that certain things are brought up that never answered. I'm sure, like, definitely know in that video I referenced like Lost. Like, the fact of the matter is, like, that was an emotional ending, but not like an ending. I mean, at least like to everyone, because you didn't get every question answered, but still, you know. So some people might look at that as like an incomplete ending. See, the difference between an incomplete ending and a complete ending, it's to me, it's such an interesting thing, because like an ending is just the end of a story, and it's like as long as the main plot has come to an end, whether or not all those loose ends are tied up or not, it's like a thing on its own. That's why I'm like, to me, that's why I use the term incomplete or complete. But even then, that's not even really a right description, because it's like the main story is complete, but yeah, there might be like storylines that are maybe like not completely concluded. Like an example would be kind of something like Grimm. Like in Grimm's final season, they set up a lot of interesting things. This might be entering spoiler territory. I won't talk about the ending specifically, but the story itself had a conclusion. It's like, yeah, all these adventures have led to this one moment and one point in time. Like, granted, we never find out like what, like, we know how significant this showdown, this final showdown was in the Grimm universe, but we don't know like what are like the ramifications for it like happening. What does that mean for like both the human world and the Vestin world? I mean, maybe it's not like that big of an impact. I mean, it has an impact, but unless you're in the know, you wouldn't know about it. I mean, I know like me saying a lot of that means nothing. Like, I'm just trying to talk around it. It's even using the term Vestin. This is like the second time I've kind of brought that up before in a video where I'm like, I'm using the term Vestin, and if you've not watched Grimm, that means absolutely nothing to you. But nevertheless, there were things that were kind of brought up in the final season of Grimm that were kind of world building, in a sense of trying to find out like, oh, this might be where Vestin come from, because Vestin were never really brought up before. It's just like a, oh, like since the very beginning, it's like, yeah, Vestin are a thing. They exist in this world. They've been around a long time. Humans just have not known about them. The only humans that know about them are Grimms. But like I said, the final season kind of elaborated. I'm like, oh yeah, this is possibly like, you know, that Vestin are believed to possibly come from another world. Like, it's stuff that was left a little open-ended. There were certain storylines that are like, oh, there might be more to that, but it's kind of like, oh, Nick and the others might have dealt with this after the series finale, because obviously there's kind of a time skip in there. I know, spoilers, but I'm still dancing around it a little bit. But so I'm getting back to it. It's like, the fact of the matter is, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to whether or not you like all storylines, you know, being tidy up, or you're okay with not getting answers to everything. I don't know where I am in that. Like, as long, like, to me, I feel like when it comes to certain situations like that, I never really think about it a lot, where it's like, oh yeah, like there are these storylines, like on occasion I'll be like, no, I'm fine with, either fine with where they are, or forget that that's a thing anyway, so I just kind of drop it. So either way, I'm fine with it, as long as the main story has a conclusion. I mean, because there's like a multitude of endings where it's like, I've kind of talked, kind of elaborated on it earlier. Happy endings where it's like happily ever after type of situations where everything is okay. Do you even like, I mean, I'm curious about that too. Like, do you like those type of endings? Like, I mean, I guess it also depends on the series, because, you know, some series you can be like, oh yeah, I can see it easily having a happy ending, but I also can see it easily having a sad ending. Some series you're like, oh, there's no way this ends happily. Like, made a video like a little while back where I talked about, you know, like, how do you feel about a character dying in a series and stuff like that. That's kind of ties into what the ending too. Like, are you okay with like a hero dying at the end? Would you prefer that a hero die? Once again, does that depend on the story too? I don't want to spoil anything, but there's many series, I'll just say, that end with like the main protagonist dying, if not a lot of the main protagonists, especially like going into like a final season and stuff. That's definitely the territory for, yeah, we're starting to kill characters off left and right. Like something that's come up recently, I think it was like Kind of Funny was talking about, like, how would The Walking Dead end? Now, whether it's a comic book or whether it's a TV show, to me, that's a show that I feel like no matter what, that's going to have a depressing ass ending. Whether it's like, you know, and it's something that's kind of floating around my head. It's like either like at the very end of the series they're going to kill off Rick being a possibility. I mean, but that kind of ties into the fact that that's the nature of that show. That show has very depressing storylines, and certain people's stories conclude in very depressing ways. Or you can have certain endings, like, I won't spoil what show it's connected to, but there's a show that has an ending where it's like they kind of rewind time and make it so that like certain, I mean, arguably you could argue and say like that's kind of where 12 Monkeys is going to go, but it's like that's going to definitely be an interesting one too, with the whole concept of 12 Monkeys, because it's like, yeah, we're trying to make sure that this future never happens, so that like technically when it's all said and done we won't exist anymore. So that puts an interesting turn to all that, especially because it's like you already know where a lot of certain storylines end up, because because of the whole time travel thing. But that means like the whole point is to erase like, you know, the future and kind of create a new future where it's like obviously these relationships and everything that's been built would no longer exist. So it's like everything will ultimately undone, but granted that's the nature of that story and everything. And then the point I'm trying to get to is that the show I was mentioning before, it kind of does that in its final season. The previous season and the final season, there's a little bit of a gap in between, and like the ending kind of rewinds it back to that gap space, and it's like, yep, everything was undone, everything you experienced then is undone. So it kind of has a sad ending in that sense, but like normally I'm not really 100% okay with those type of endings, but that particular show I was fine with. But usually I don't like endings where like everything is undone or it was like a dream. I don't like that, because it undoes everything. Like this particular situation, it didn't undo everything, it just undid like, but in a sense, like when you actually really break it down and think about it too much, it's like, well, technically that means that ending didn't happen, so that means everything that we've experienced didn't happen. But at the end of the day, it's not, a lot of times it isn't about the ending, it is about the journey. I know that's cliche and cheesy, but the fact of the matter is that's true, especially in that case, because it's like all about the journey to get to that ending. Because even though that ending happened, there were things that happened because someone remembers it, because like someone had to sacrifice themselves to make sure that ending happened, and that rewind happens, you know. So you can't say, it's not a situation where you can be like, oh, it was all for nothing. So I'm actually sitting here and thinking like, what's like the best ending, you know, that I can think of? Because like I guess like the one that like I've ever come across is Rosario plus Vampire. Like that's easily one of my favorite endings. It's an ending where it's like I want a little bit more, but I understand why you left it off where you left it off, because it's one of those situations where it's like the main story has closed off, but obviously you've paved the way for new potential storylines, but it's like you're going to end it there. And I've always constantly said it over and over again, I would love it if the creator of Rosario plus Vampire decided like, oh, I'm gonna make another season of it. Like, cause it's an anime / manga series, which I highly recommend you check it out. I've always said I highly recommend you check out the manga instead of the anime. I just personally think the manga's better, but that's just me just being, you know, snooty about it. So I'm one of those people, like, it's like, oh, you shouldn't watch that TV show, or, you know, watch that movie, you should read the book that is an adaptation of blah blah blah, like that. I know, I'm sorry. There are also surprise endings. I won't spoil it for it either, but there's like Banshee had a surprising ending, and I'll kind of elaborate on it a little bit. Things ended more positively than I thought they were. It's something I didn't think about at the time when I was talking about it, but now in retrospect, it's like, that ended a lot more positively. I thought everything was gonna be messed up by the end. It's like, no, storylines came to an end, everything. That's a show where it's like every storyline was like tidied up in a tight little bow. I mean, you don't know exactly where everything could go with certain stories. They were kind of left up in the air, but it's like it could have gone one of two ways with one particular character storyline. Won't even say who that character is. Like I said, everything else is just kind of settled. So, and also there's something else I haven't really elaborated on at all in this video also, now I'm thinking about it, is the fact is that before I've been talking about concrete endings, like, oh yeah, this is the end, pure and simple. But what about video game endings? Because video games have introduced the aspect of like, oh yeah, there's actual multiple endings. They're kind of the only medium I feel like that have that. Because they were my introduction to the whole aspect of like multiple endings. You know, some games have a good ending, a bad ending, and in some cases there's a true ending. And like I say, video games have designed it so like you have to go through certain aspects to get endings. An example I can use is like a video game series, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, is Shadow Hearts. Shadow Hearts was the first example of like multiple endings to me. There are 3 video games, technically 4 throughout the series. There's one there's a video game called Codeka that takes place before Shadow Hearts, but nevertheless, I'm familiar with Shadow Hearts 1, 2, and 3. Each one has a good ending and a bad ending. In the second one, this is kind of spoilers, but that comes down to a choice whether or not you get the good ending or the bad ending. 1 and 3, you have to go through certain things without the story, like certain side things you have to do before you get to the end of the game, and that will determine whether or not whether you've done those things or not will determine whether you get the good ending or the bad ending. Probably like the most recent examples of something like that, obviously, is like that, at least that I'm aware of, is like the Drakengard series, as well as slash the Nier series. Like they have like a crap ton of endings. I'm not sure about like Nier. I think the proper pronunciation is automata. I always say automata, but it's like automata. It's like I think the proper pronunciation of it. Like that game, I'm not even sure how many endings that has, but I'm aware that it has like a crap ton of endings, and like that's the type of situation where it's like the first Nier has like 4 endings. There's a special thing with those 4 endings though, which is kind of like makes it kind of its own thing. I'm not sure if that applies to Nier Automata or not, but that's the thing too. Like, how do you feel about something like that that has multiple endings? Like, you know, I mean, in certain situations, like going back to the Shadow Hearts situation, because there are multiple endings, but there are also canon endings as well, because obviously there was a subsequent second Shadow Hearts, and after that a subsequent third Shadow Hearts. So obviously you can make sequels without there being any connection, but usually you want to make a loosely tied connection, which is like for example, like for Shadow Hearts 1 to 2, it's the bad ending is the canon ending. From Shadow Hearts 2 to 3, the canon ending is a good ending. I didn't go into too much details. I know, like, I mean, I think that's okay as long as I'm not saying exact endings, so I think I'm not ruining everything, but that's how those work. So does that make the endings better in a sense? I mean, I wonder, does it detract from it because you know that there is another ending? Like for example, with Shadow Hearts 1, you'd want the good ending to be the canon ending, but it's like, nope, the bad ending is the one. But it breaks your heart knowing that that's, you know, because it's like, because you see the good ending and you're like, that has the potential to be a, you know, it ends off a happy note. So like, as I've talked about in the video, like also like, what do you prefer, happy endings, sad endings? Another one I'm kind of familiar with that kind of falls under that same category is the Persona games. I'm not that familiar with, but I do know they have bad endings, good endings, as well as true endings. That's kind of elaborate. It kind of fits with the whole Shadow Hearts thing too, of like, it depends on how much of said things you've done. Like, I'm not sure about all the criteria for getting like the quote-unquote true endings for a Persona game. I think it's like maxing out all your social links and stuff like that before the end of the game rolls around. So I'm thinking like stuff like that. My question to you is, what type of endings do you like? Once again, like, do you prefer happy ending, everything tied up in a nice little bow, like I said, a complete ending? Are you fine with things being incomplete? Would you prefer things to kind of be like, I mean, like at the end of the day, like no matter what the nature of the show is, what type of ending would you want? Would you want a happy ending? Would you be like, no, the ending has to fit the show? If it's kind of a depressing show, it better have a depressing ending. It needs to have one. Or like, if it's a depressing show, it needs to have a happy ending because it needs to balance out in some shape or form. Let me know in the comments down below. But really, that's all I want to talk about in this video. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.